welcome to another episode of The Influential Nonprofit. I'm your host, of course. I'm Marianne Dersch, and I work with nonprofit leaders to master the art of influence so they can ask for and receive all they want, need, and deserve, which you deserve everything to do the good work that you want to do. And I bet you didn't wake up this morning and say, I love conflict. I can't wait to start a fight, because me either. And in fact, I have had a long and interesting journey with conflict and how I view it. And today we are going to talk about how to navigate conflict and conflict resolution, because nothing in this world has ever changed without a fight, right? And without some kind of conflict. And the way our country was formed, the way anything is created, there is conflict. And we're going to talk about it with my two new best friends. Okay. You're Kim Faircloth. You have a bunch of letters after your name, but you're a seasoned conflict resolution specialist with 30 years experience. And then I have Dawn Bedlivy. You're a distinguished ombudsman and faculty member at the University of Maryland, Carey Law School, School of Law. And you are going to help us understand how to effectively navigate conflict. Correct? Okay. Now, right. Before I get started, I always ask the same question, and you can answer individually or collectively, doesn't matter to me.
Okay.
Tell me something that you're really proud of that you don't get to brag about a lot.
Right. That's a great question, Mary. And I think one thing that I'm super proud of and we don't really brag a lot about is just being able to build a powerful partnership with Kim. Not something I really brag about. And I think a lot of times maybe I take it for granted, but when we think about conflict resolution and the importance of it to building lasting relationship and foundation and how you build from there, that's what I'm most proud of. How we've been able to navigate that ourselves over many years. And we're peacemakers, but that doesn't mean we don't have conflict.
Correct.
So I think I would say that. So I think that's one thing I am super most proud of.
Okay, Kim, your turn.
Me too. Yes, and I
love you already. Yes, and
yes, and I also would even add to that. I'm kind of proud that I have a great attitude, as does Dawn, about people, despite meeting them at their most vulnerable and sometimes, not their greatest time. When they're going through conflict and they're seeking help, or maybe they've even caused the conflict, like really, and you start to engage in these stories all the time, whether that's divorce mediation or workplace mediation or conflict resolution of all sorts, and you could end up with sort of a jaded view of the world. But I'm proud of the fact that we don't think that. And in fact, we don't set ourselves up that way. We think that everyone's a mess. I'm a mess. You're a mess. Dawn's a mess. At one point or another, we're all a mess. Conflict is absolutely normal. And people are, for the most part, don't wake up looking for it, but they find themselves in it. And that's kind of our niche. And I'm proud to have a good attitude about it.
That's wonderful. And I just feel like it's a skill that we're not taught, right? We have to learn, but it comes into our lives all the time. And especially in the nonprofit sector, we're helpers. I think we see that conflict is a bad thing. And I've seen a lot of cultures that are just bounded by kindness, right? Like niceness, and they're not telling the truth. And then it's going to come out eventually, right? Everybody sits in the meeting and they go, yeah, sure. And then they get out of the meeting and they say how they really feel to their colleague or their partner or whatever.
Right.
They're not able to speak the truth in the moment. And I just want to share with you really quickly, like how I see this. One of my coaches, his name is Dr. Aaron Wilkerson. He was explaining to me like about the peace and conflict. It's a balance. It's like a teeter-totter, right? Because if you put peace on a pedestal and sacrifice everything in the name of peace, eventually what's going to happen? Boom, right? That peace and you create, then it's going to blow up into conflict, right? And so by a little, and I always think about that, like creating a little conflict actually creates peace. But when we sacrifice, sooner or later, it's going to explode. And so this happened in my life. Like my son, he and my husband would fight all the time, and I hated it. And so I would say, well, I'm gonna handle AJ. But my way of handling AJ was to like pacify him, because I was right, because I thought that was the better way, because they would argue, and sooner or later, it's like, it was like that piece, and then boom, he actually, like, that exploded into like enormous conflict, which was really painful for everyone. He was actually like hospitalized for a while. And so I learned, but even now I like, they'll fight a little bit and I'll be like, oh, like I just like I want to just go into a hole, because that's what I was taught, like conflict. I think this all comes from our childhood. But anyway, so I look at it as a way of like, if I can allow for a little conflict, I'm actually creating peace, because I'm working on that balance. And that
Right.
conflict is just a natural part of it. It's not, that's not going to happen. It's, and the way the conflict isn't the problem, it's avoiding it. That is.
Yeah.
And that, yeah. So that was me, like and I talk, and sharing this because this is what I talk to the people who listen to this podcast about, is like that balance of peace and conflict, right? Of joy and pain, like it's all of, and if we allow for one, we allow for the other.
We have a change model so we wrote Conflict Sparks Change. Did not name our own book. Actually, the editor said that's what this book is, right? Conflict Sparks Change. And if you think about it, you started out this way, and I think you're really starting to articulate it, that at the beginning of every innovation, at the beginning of any change, you have two competing ideas, you have two competing interests, two competing thoughts, and they don't coincide, exist well together yet. And something new is trying to emerge, Marianne. And when you can focus on the fact that I can either take a interpersonal, which we all will do. Get us tired. Mom's got cancer. We can take interpersonal paths, right? Where we start to explode and all the rest. Or we can say, what is possible now? What is trying to emerge from this? Even in a family situation, what's trying to come forward from this, and really dig into that. But sometimes, it means that we need to delay responding for a few moments or maybe even a whole day. Time does matter. We need to reflective think. What is it that's got me wanting to, maybe respond this way? I happen to be a retaliator. I'll put your email at the bottom. I'll vacuum under the chair. I mean, so what makes me want? I mean, come on, really, it's like you've done it. Yeah, we've done it. So we're like, what makes us? And then when we get ready to reach out, we have to reach out with the idea that there is another perspective, and that's the key to it. And it's not perspective taking; it's perspective seeking. Yeah, Dawn, what are you thinking as she speaks?
Yeah, there's so much here. I think a lot of richness you opened up, Marianne, kind of from the beginning, where you were talking about, where conflict lives everywhere, right? It's in our homes. It's kind of, and as you were describing the situation with your son and Kim was talking, I was thinking, that's not all that different than what happens in the workplace either. Or as a leader, where you're trying to, well, if I just pacify this employee, right, I'll give them this, or I'll give them that, or I'll give them that. And then it doesn't really work, right? Because ultimately that person probably has some very different interests than everybody else, right? So what we find so magical sometimes about learning to harness the power of conflict is that however we deal with conflict at work, we're going to deal with it better in our personal lives. So it's really, these skills take us on a journey, both professionally and personally. And now I think what happens, it happened to me, I think it happened to Kim. I'm sure it's happened to you, Marianne, that you can't behave this differently at work or at home anymore. Mm-hmm. At some point, when you know better everywhere.
Right. I feel the same. There's no personal life and professional life. How you show up one place is how you show up every place. Right. Mm-hmm. And people who work with me, who take my course, like I had this one person who took my course because they had sort of an overbearing boss that they wanted to help navigate more effectively. Like the boss was really interesting because the boss wanted the participant to take the course, but it was really to manage her. But you don't think that her ability to set healthier boundaries and create new agreements in her workspace didn't affect her ability to navigate her siblings' care of their, aging mother, right?
Yeah.
Like those skills translate across everything. And that's why I look at it as a complete package, right? How we show up one place is how we show up every place. And any skill that you can use to build a better relationship can work in any relationship that you have, right? You may apply it a little differently, but the skill set is the same, right? And Dr. Aaron also talks about like the family is the Olympics, right? So,
Yes.
because my husband,
right.
I literally teach people how to be more empathetic and validation and all that. And then my husband and I saw this counselor for a long time to help us with our kids. My kids are adopted. They all have special needs, but to help us with our kids. And she would say, Marianne, your job is to be more empathetic in the next 2 weeks. And I literally teach people how to do this. But it was so hard with him, right? Because like you got to work your way up. So I'm just saying this because the skill sets, it may come more slowly to people who are closer than you because you just have more. There's more triggers. There's more skin.
Oh,
in the
yeah.
game,
There's so much more emotion there. And I think it all really starts with shifting the mindset from that peace means the absence of conflict, and it doesn't really mean the absence of conflict, right? That's not what peace actually is.
What is peace actually?
So I think when we think of peaceful workplaces, they're engaged workplaces where people feel valued and that they're able to bring value and worth to the organization. That to me is the definition of peace. I think it's the same on a national level. What is peace at the national level? We're all able to do what we need to do. We're not infringing on each other. You talked about boundaries, right? We're respecting boundaries. It doesn't mean we're not going to have conflict, but we're channeling that conflict someplace productive as opposed to, I don't know, war, right?
Right.
We could differ as to whether that's productive, but as kids, what did we do? We either kind of beat on each other, whatever, we try to stop that with our kids, but that's not productive at the end of the day. So really it's about, do we have a productive way of handling that emotion, handling that conflict, and channeling it into what we want to create?
Yeah.
That's really peace.
Yeah. I love that. And I love what you said before about there's something new that wants to emerge. Like, what's the new thing?
Beginning of the change process. Yes.
Yes, because I talk a lot about what's beyond the binary.
Yes,
right.
exactly.
So our typical model, and I guess this is probably what you do, right? Our typical model is I see it this way, you see it that way. We're either going to see it, it's either my way or your way. Right. Yep. And then so we say, what's the secret option C? What's beyond the binary? What is the third, what I call the higher third that my friend calls the secret option C, which I'm stealing? Like, what is that thing that we're not thinking of? Because I think it has to be your way or has to be my way. And so when we stay trapped in the binary, then there's the creative possibilities are not there. But I love what you're saying. Like, what is trying to emerge from this? What is the new thing? And so you said you had like, if that's the first step is understanding there's something new that's trying to emerge, and then where do we go from there?
So I would say that, so the mindset is definitely important, and an exploration, a self-exploration. One of the first questions we ask is, what did you learn about conflict as a child? And kind of going back,
sure.
We ask people to reflect upon their favorite quote about conflict that just really resonates with them. Leaders, we ask them to be mindful of how they want to be remembered in conflict because it's super important. But it's along those lines that we start to get into, you hinted at it, and I'm going to pull the thread on it, that we don't really learn conflict skills. I mean, when was the last time someone sat at work and talked to you about your conflict skills? Not emotional intelligence, that's great. But now I'm at work and I need to engage in conflict productively. I have to, right? The other side of that is avoidance or yielding, and that's not sustainable. right? And in fact, there is a cost to that to a company, and companies are measuring that. Conflict avoidance and conflict yielding, where I just give in just to get along.
Yeah.
Compromise, where I just say, we'll just compromise. That's nice for a step. But what happens is later on down the road, when something doesn't work, that other person says, see, we should have gone with my idea from the get-go. So you're just kicking the can down the road. What we want to do is collaborate to something new, which means then I have to upskill my conflict skills. And I have to be perceived when in conflict, especially as a leader, a project leader, or even an HR director or leader. I need to be perceived as trustworthy in conflict. And what I mean by that, we have a model that talks about the 4 C's that you really need to be mindful of if you're going to be trusted in conflict. The first C is that you're competent, right? So I trust my husband of 46 years, Marianne, but he's not giving me a root canal. I don't trust him to do it because he's not competent. So if you think that competence isn't a big part of it, it is a big part of trust. For me to trust you in the work that you do, I have to perceive that for you to trust me to be your mediator, you have to perceive that I am competent at it as a leader, which then brings us to the second C, which is confidence. Right? You need to so I don't want to go to that person giving me a root canal who's shaking and saying, I don't, for me to trust you, think about it. For me to trust
you really hit a trigger. I have a dental.
Yeah,
you have to say root canal one more time, I'm going to pass out.
Exactly. Project some confidence, right? The third thing is that you need to be consistent. Leaders, you need to not the last one in, right, is the one that you're going with, just the last thing you hear, but what is it? And by consistent, I mean with your own values about how you want to lead and how you want to portray your job, how you want to be remembered with it, and be consistent with that. And people really do value that. And then the final one, really, Marianne, in order for me to trust you, I have to perceive that you're caring. Right? I have to perceive that you care enough to meet me where I am in this conflict dialogue and not leave me there alone. That's really what I think is the final thing. So those 4 C's, really, if you could upskill on all of those and sort of own that and reflect upon it. I talk about journal on it. Get a good conflict skills building, meaning how to, not big picture, but literally steps to take. And we'll give you one model for steps to take. Dawn will talk about our HERE model, but it is important that you spend some quality time with a good program that helps you to actually build skills.
Right. This is a practice, right? I see it as this that you're going to be working on and constantly refining. This isn't not, and it just takes going in there and doing it and maybe not being great at it. I want to hear the HERE model, but before Dawn, I want you to, because one of the things you said was delay response, and this may be covered in what you're going to tell me, but what if you're in a situation, okay, let me back up. Sometimes in an email, it's really easy, or a text, my first response is I want to get right.
Don't send it yet if you can help it.
I can take a breath, right? And I can teach myself, right, that competence, the confidence, to take a step back, gather my thoughts. But what if I'm in a situation where I don't feel like I can delay the response? Like somebody's coming at me in person or on a call like this. Yeah. So how do you let them go?
There's 2 things that I tell. First of all, you can take a few deep breaths. You can, the first thing that you think does not have to come out of your mouth. I know, look.
I wish someone would have told my mom that. Exactly. It would have been great for my mom to have that
right.
skill.
It's rare, it's rare but it is possible, of course, that you need to take that deep breath and that you need to think a few minutes and don't, try to listen to understand, and that allows you some time to gather your thoughts and to be mindful of your thoughts and your mouth. That's one. Or preferably, if it is complex, what's wrong with saying, and I teach leaders to do this all the time, you know what? You have given me so much to think about. Thank you. Thank you for trusting that you can bring this to me. Thank you. I want to respect you by thinking about this just for an hour or so before I want to collect my thoughts. Do you know most people get that?
Yeah.
That you want to collect your thoughts. And in fact, they want to collect theirs too. So the HERE model allows you to dig in and to be coactive with the person, but you don't have to. It's like if you have this mindset that everything has to be solved right away. Now that's different than avoiding or yielding and taking too long of time. But be careful. Be careful with your first thoughts. They're not usually the ones that are your best. They really are not. And
Yeah,
and if
probably.
it's important, then you want to do it right. And you just
Right.
use the words to say that.
And I was just going to add to that, Marianne, because sometimes I'm on the board of a nonprofit, actually, which is kind of interesting. And there's going to be times when the leader's going to have something just thrown out on the table. And you're right, you can't run away, you can't. And how you react in that moment is really going to shape sometimes how things go for the next month or so. I mean, we always know you have time to repair. That's why I think it's really important for leaders to take a breath and then really think about, as you feel it becoming about you really have to step outside yourself and say, what do I need to do right now to put this back in a box and get us moving in a productive way? So we talk about getting the issue out from between the people and getting it to be where it's us against the problem. You talked about that. And it is a hard skill to master in the moment, kind of doing that jujitsu move. If anyone does martial arts out there, but it's almost like what you were describing was almost an attack, but it's almost being able to divert that energy into a productive space.
Yeah.
So what we always find with people, it's helpful to have some words on hand. So, let's take a breath here and kind of look at the issue we're trying to solve, or something that you can say in a moment that interrupts the attack, right? Because if you're seeing two people go at it and people are uncomfortable, as a leader, it is your responsibility to shift that right away, because you love the passion and something maybe huge is needing to come out on that table.
Probably is.
But you need to get it into a box where now you can unpack it and maybe either get another meeting going or say, look, we need to take a break here or whatever it is. But I think we talked about the confidence. It's to give yourself permission to take an appropriate step. Sometimes we feel like as leaders, we've got to just sit there or we've got to deal with it in the moment. I think you said that, Kim, but you have permission to say, whoa, this is big. Let's take a breath. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Because when you feel attacked, then you go into instinct, into fight or flight, freeze, fawn, nothing productive. I won't say nothing, but it's going to be harder to access. You're going to very base level survival thoughts and it becomes protection. Even with my kids and the model that we use, which was an 11-step behavior management process. The first step is, am I regulated? Are they regulated? And, because I intuitively can do this now, but it took some practice to understand, like, when the time is right to talk about this, I will know, but it's not right now. And it's not, like you said, it's not avoiding, it's just knowing that when people feel attacked, their brain is going to, that instinct brain, the amygdala is going to take over. And so I
That's right, is real. Yeah, it is a real thing.
Yes. Like I tell people, if you can feel, if your heart's pounding, if your knees are weak, right, you've got, like, paying attention, like, if you are relaxed and comfortable, but if that's happening to you, then because it severely limits your ability to have new thoughts, right?
Biologically, when that happens, your logic side is now compromised. And not only that, your broca. which is the part of your brain that regulates speech, is compromised. So the words that come out are just not going to be as articulate as you would hope
It's
they
like
would be.
that's why you think of the great line like 20 minutes after and you're driving home or
Yeah,
like,
yeah, it's
oh, I
exactly
should have said
why.
that because your
Yeah,
brain literally couldn't access those thoughts. And because when I work with
so
people on
true.
fundraising, one of the things that we work on is keeping people relaxed. I teach them to have conversations rooted in listening and validation instead of pitching and selling, because when you start to pitch or sell, people will dig in and they're gonna push back. And the more you push, the more they're gonna push back. And so how can you keep people open and regulated? Because then they're going to be open to what you have to say. And it's the same thing. It's not based in conflict, but it can lead to conflict if you feel like you're pushing people. And the same thing was going to go off. Okay, but I want you to explain the here model because we've teased it a couple times.
I
So
think it's a great model to give yourself time to settle down. Dawn, you want to talk about it?
well, I think it applies nicely. And what's interesting, Marianne, is every time we do these podcasts or we think about the models, we're finding new ways to apply them. So I'm almost wondering if you can't use the here model with yourself, but it's meant it's meant in dialogue with another person. And the first part of here is if you're having a one-on-one conversation, or actually, if you think about it, if you're a leader in the room and something's just put on the table, we talk about first and foremost the first H is honoring the relationship. And what that means is understanding that, well, first of all, you want to set the parameters for the conversation. So if we're in a meeting in a boardroom and we're discussing a topic, it might be the leader just reminding everybody, this meeting is about X. If we need to have another meeting about Y, then we'll have another meeting about Y. But I need to bring us back, right? So really honoring the parameters of the relationship.
Okay.
When you're a leader and you're one-on-one and someone's coming in to maybe reveal something or talk about something, or an HR professional, we wrote this for our HR professionals, it's really being clear up front with somebody what the parameters of this conversation are. We used to deal a lot in the one-on-one space where people had troubling things they wanted to talk to their leaders about. Let's just say that. And we would always up front have to say to them whether this was confidential or not. And we would deal with a lot of leaders who said, this person came in and they said, you can't tell anybody else, but I want to tell you what's really going on around here, right? And so first and foremost, we said, you understand you have to tell somebody else. Like if you're in a conversation with somebody, you're a leader of an organization, you have a responsibility to the organization. And so that's first and foremost. If you're having a conversation with somebody, make sure everybody's on the same page with regard to, is this confidential? Is this not? What are we going to, what are the parameters of it? And I think in a larger setting, it's what are we here to try and accomplish? And maybe sometimes reminding people about that, right? And then the E is really about exploring. And sometimes, a lot of times we'll skip that step. We don't, we might hear a little bit of what someone says and then we cut them off and we give them what they should do, right? Instead of sitting back and saying, I really need to hear and understand what you came in about. So I'm going to give you the time you need to really explore what happened, what's going on. And then the R piece is, and sometimes we teach these conflict models that are very strict for people. And it's like, well, what I hear you say is that, and it's just not real in a conversation, right? But what we do say
I say that all the time. I just said that to you earlier. But I mean, I guess it feels good to me. It may not feel good to somebody else.
Sometimes not. And sometimes folks can feel a little like if they've been trained, then they'd be a little annoyed. We just find, you just have to know who you're talking to.
Sure.
But it is important, just like you did for us, Marianne, to have some way of repeating what it is you heard.
Right.
Right. And letting the person know, this is what I'm hearing you tell me. This happened and this happened. This is how you felt. And it's really important to have that R stage. And then the E stage, the last E, is really about forward momentum. Exploring kind of the next phase. What's going to happen next? Right. Now that you brought this to me, what are the next steps? And really having a conscious conversation about that. And you can do it with a group. It's just a lot harder to do it with a group, especially if there's a lot of emotion in the space.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you said a couple of things that are so important. I want to highlight. First is just allowing somebody without giving a solution, without solving the problem, because nothing makes people feel more unseen or unheard than advice.
Yes.
Right? Like, I'm so sad today. I don't understand why you're sad. You're like, wait, what? Or like, oh, when I'm sad, I like to, do yoga. What? Like, oh, that, tell me why you're sad. Like that, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, and nothing, what I teach people, there's wisdom and advice, right? And wisdom comes from lived experience and it's given with permission. So it's like, what I hear you say is you're really struggling with this. That's something I struggled with. Would it be okay if I shared my thoughts? It's a whole different thing than trying to tell people what to do, but just allowing people to just give that full exploration of a problem without cutting them off. I think that for me, in my experience, actually really dismantles, like brings the temperature down a lot on that problem.
Oh, and actually, a lot of times what we found, sometimes people will solve it themselves just by sitting there and letting it all come out.
Yep.
And
I
just
wish
by
I would, we
listening.
would be rich. I know I would be rich if I had you hold the old story, a nickel for the number of people that have said to me, wow, that's the first time in this whole story. Because by the time they find a conflict resolution professional, they've tried a lot and now
Yeah.
they're finding some help, right? This is the first time somebody actually really listened to me. And listening is that summary part, that reflecting with them part, the second, the HER, the reflecting, we skip that. And it's not summarizing what you think, it's summarizing what they said. And sometimes when they've said it, it's the first time their ears heard it.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. It's usually so. I was saying the other day, I don't even know if it's a word, but decomplexifying it. It's a mess. And now I'm starting to articulate to someone, especially the first time I articulate, just be present, just be here, just be here with them, and that you don't have to go right to there's any pressure to solve it. And in fact, I think it's extremely respectful to just say, I'm just going to be present with you. Let's talk together and co-create our next steps. So if you
Right.
say that in the beginning while you're honoring the relationship, this is what I will promise you. I don't even know what you're going to say. And you're here. Thank you. Thank you for coming to see me and letting me have this opportunity. Of course, we're going to do something with it. I think you're not stuck. You're here. You made a move. But what I will promise you at the end of our conversation, we'll co-create what's going to happen next. And I
Right.
think that is honoring the whole conversation, right? And it also gives, again, the person time to settle down.
Right.
You're just in a listening and a respectful mode, but it's active listening, though. They have to be
Right.
able to summarize back. So you have to be, actively listening. But
Right. So sometimes when people say like surprising, inappropriate, unexpected things, and what there's a practice, they're called ledges. You may know this, like, oh, tell me more about that. Help me understand that. What makes you say that? What makes you ask that? Because it gives me as the listener, right, time to take a breath, right? And it gives them a time to explore. So one of the things that I did a little workshop about was like I call them unexpected comments. Like, when people just say wacky stuff to you and you're like, and you really don't owe anybody an answer. Like somebody's at your event and they thought, oh, I thought we'd have, more florals or something. I don't know, whatever. And you want to, and you're
how there
like,
be cookies
and
on the
you're like
table? Exactly.
off. Like, what the hell? But like, oh, that's interesting. What makes you say that? Or because then they can tell, but you don't have to like solve it, fix it, promise it, nothing. Like, oh, that's so interesting. What makes you say that? Or tell me more about that, or help me understand that. Like I tell you, you don't have to give them an answer about what right? Like you can just
Be curious.
receive that comment
Yeah,
and
just
let it go.
And
let it
isn't it great,
They
Mary
can
Ann, when
throw a
people,
bomb. It doesn't have to land on you, right? Like because people just throw bombs out there and you can just go, oh, that's so interesting. It takes work. This is a practice, right? But sometimes those little phrases, see, my kids are adopted, they're Black, and I've had people tell me inappropriate crap my whole life. So I had to learn this when my kids were little, and people would say stuff to me like, "How much did your kids cost?" and blah blah blah. And like, and I swear this happened all the time. And I'm like, "Oh, what makes you ask that?" Now the onus is on that person to have to justify or explain the question, not me to have to justify or explain where my kids came from. You see what I mean? So
I do, but you know, in conflict, that really matters as you're sitting and intaking a story, right? I'll call it that.
yeah,
When you sometimes it's those little things. Remember, I said if you understand the biology enough to know that I am now hijacked a bit, right? And the way I want to say something is maybe not as articulate as it needs to be. There's not sometimes the filter's gone all of it. All of that's information. You know, one of the first questions Dawn and I ask customers when they come in and they just are unable to begin, right? Like they don't know how to start this big thing that's got them coming to find you. We ask them, how about we just start here? When you decided to pick up the phone and call us, what was happening right that minute? You finally made the decision you were going to come find, or you were going to seek a friend,
enough of this.
you were going to seek your leader. What was it that moment? And then grow the story from there. That's a way of settling, like giving that brain something to hang on to. Really important. If you're going to upskill your conflict skills, you're gonna need to learn a little bit about fight or flight, and you're going to need to be able to believe that they're either an alien or a human. And if they are human, all information goes through the feeling side.
Right.
It's the emotional.
It just does. We like, I had somebody say to me once, I was hoping to avoid the drama, but it's like, well, no, but the drama is part of the processing of what's happening, right? And when people get to process it, in my experience, when people they just want to be heard. And when they feel heard and understood, that's when the conflict kind of like I don't want to say it disappears, but it greatly reduces. Because right once they feel seen and heard, now they're going to be open to what you have to say or open to a possibility. But they're not going to be there until they feel like you understand.
Yeah.
I
That's all of our mediations. Every
Yeah.
one of them. There are two parties with two stories. We can go investigate it, or we can come together and have a conversation about it and find out that every one of the mediations we have learned something we didn't know before we went in the room, because we're both traveling on our paths, right? And all of a
Right.
sudden, those paths are not. They don't perceive that there's any unity in the paths. Most often there are.
So
At least there's the business problem.
sure. I want to ask a question. Like my husband runs a biotech startup,
Yep.
and he's a scientist of like the highest order, right? And
Yep.
so and he's very like data driven, and he was in a meeting and blah blah blah, and then he came out of the meeting and they're like, "Dang, you were really heated," and I was like, so he did not see it as conflict at all. But there's people in the room who are really kind of overwhelmed or like uncomfortable.
Yep.
And so I guess some people have like a little like a different like emotional temperature, like their conflict oven like is set a little lower. I realized that what I do when things got to be a little emotional or I felt a little conflict, I would cry, I would make a joke. And I've learned to like, oh, like in my whole brain would be like, make a joke, don't do it, just sit in it, because like my whole body wanted to break the tension or what I perceived as tension, right? And I was, that was just a habit of mine formed from childhood that I realized I was doing, and now I consciously can do it. But he was like, he walked out of the room like, I think some people are creating maybe in conflict, they don't even know they are at the time because they just don't perceive it that way, because he was having like somebody thought he was having a heated conversation. He's like, no, we were just reviewing the data and I saw it this way and you saw it that way. But for him, that didn't feel like conflict. And
I think that's a really important point, Mary. And as you're talking, I'm thinking that's a really important space for a leader. Again, we talked about kind of leaders being able to do that jujitsu of conflict and how, so because that's almost cultural. I want to say that, not from a nation state point of view, but cultural from a scientific point of view, because in the scientific community, that's expected. You are going to challenge each other's data and each other's assumptions. And thank goodness that they do. But social science, maybe not as the same kind of culture of challenge, right? And certainly maybe in the finance world, not the same challenge. I'm an attorney, so I would do that naturally with another attorney, and it would make other people uncomfortable in the office. And I realized the same thing. But I think there's an opportunity for a leader almost to educate. If they're sensing that or seeing that, it's probably important for them to intervene at that point and say, I noticed you were a little uncomfortable. I just want to engage with you on that. And kind of address it and say, and to your husband, it might be, look, when you're addressing these folks that aren't in your world, you just need to be aware of the impact this might be having on them. So I think that's a great space for a leader to get in on the ground floor before things get bad and everyone keeps talking about it, just to go right to it and say, look, this is just a difference in presentation. Right. And normalize it. That's what I think leaders have a very active role is how do you normalize conflict within the organization?
Yeah. Right. And just for me, it was just embracing conflict as just a part of relationships and a part of navigating the world. But I took the normalized disagreement, right? I mean,
right.
And thank God you disagree, because we wouldn't get anything done if all we did was go around
right.
and agree with
or
each
somebody
other.
or the data would be bad and we'd all be running around with bad data. So I think
is a real problem. We used to have the terrible word that we would call the people who were not early adopters or that had different thoughts. We'd call them devil's advocates. And
I hate that word. Why do I hate that word?
To call them. These are people who are, you better have them. You better have them on your team, because if you do not have nonconformers on your team, then you have groupthink. And that is much worse than having respectful conversations, respectful debates, respectful tools in place to have these debates. And I think that we really missed the mark with not establishing that early on teams. Who are your brainstorming specialists, and putting those tools up and teaching your team, we're going to do this on those important moments. I think we could go a long way even in project teams or the work that you do in establishing a process for how we're going to debate novel ideas that are going to look like they are at odds with one another, when actually they're all towards the same goal.
Right. And there's many paths to that goal.
Sure there is.
Okay. We need to wrap up in a minute, but obviously this is a very rich conversation. So how can people learn more? Your book, how can we find your book, and how can we find you?
Yeah, so the best way is to go to our website, www.conflictsparkschange.com. And the book is on Amazon and booksellers, all the rest, Conflict Sparks Change. Everything says Conflict Sparks Change. And so the model is in there.
I love the branding. Way to go.
I love it. There's some free articles on the website. So it's worth going and kind of exploring it. You can find us on there, how that little contact button, all the magic that happens with websites. So it's pretty easy to find us. But whatever you do, we both really have put a stake in the ground for conflict, and respectful conversations is our motto for that. And they can coincide. Just watch sportscasting on the weekends. You'll see it.
Yes, for sure. Okay. They love that. Make their living from that, right? Hey, let's take a topic. Everybody pick a view and we'll fight it out.
Then they go have lunch.
Right. Okay. So I have one last question. This is how we wrap up. Obviously we're best friends and we would have so much fun together. So if you're ever in St. Louis, or I'm in Georgia or Maryland, and we wind up at a karaoke bar, which is highly likely if you're with me, what's your go-to song?
Oh, Dawn, you've got to answer that one.
Oh, well, Piano Man, Billy Joel.
Good sing-along. That's your go-to?
To be honest with you, I don't do karaoke an awful lot. However, I always sing to Billy Joel.
There you go. Yeah, he's amazing. You know, I saw like a TikTok or something where they stripped his voice and I can't remember the song. I didn't know it very well. And he had the most beautiful, pure voice. Like it was so good. And I was like, wow, he can really sing. All right, Kim, what are you singing?
I think she works hard for her money.
Yeah.
That's excellent. I like that one.
Come on for it, honey. Yes.
We do. We work so hard for our money.
We
This
do
is
work hard for our
and
money.
it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah. All right. Dawn and Kim, thanks so much for being here and all of the resources, the your website and we'll put your LinkedIn. If you're on LinkedIn, we got your LinkedIn. We'll put it in the show notes so if people want to get in touch with you. They
Love to
can.
hear
If
it.
they're looking
Thank
for
you.
help solving a conflict, I hope people reach out to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing like such an important skill for us to learn and grow into. And like I said, I've been on a journey, and so thanks for teaching me more today.
Well,
And
thank
that's it
you.
for
Thank
me.
you.
You're welcome. That's it for me in this episode of The Influential Nonprofit. We will see you next time.